Our next witness, please identify yourself, tell us where you're from and what you're here to talk about.
And should I just continue, or are you going to answer the second question?
What?
Should I just roll with it?
Roll with it.
Roll with it, okay. So my name is Mark Dunley, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Green Education and Legal Fund, which does some statewide work on climate change, but I'm also on the coordinating committee or steering committee of 350 NYC and of the coordinating committee for PCMNY. We were the initial host committee of the People's Climate March last year. And I was asked to talk about three issues, and I'm sort of going to go in a little bit of reversed order. We've had a lot of great speakers today, but I thought Dave just did a really good outline of some of the problems with what Exxon has done. I was reading on the way over some news articles in the New York Times, and they didn't quite have that laid out as well as you did. So perhaps you can become an advisor to them. So after Hurricane Sandy, I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to convince our New York State Controller, our New York City Controller, and our State Attorney General, who I knew when he used to be in the state legislature, to sue Exxon and the other fossil fuel companies over the damages caused by climate change. Well, not particularly Hurricane Sandy. Now, yes, you can't say that Hurricane Sandy was directly caused by climate change, but there's a fair amount of evidence that the severity of Hurricane Sandy was increased, and that I think we heard earlier an estimate of $60 billion damage. I think New York's share of that was around $30 billion. Why couldn't we sue Exxon, Chevron, these other big companies up here that were listed by Dave, to pay back New York State? And unfortunately, I was not able to convince them to do that. Still try to do it. I will say, every time they see me when I run into them at an event, they really start moving quickly these days, the opposite way. But I had a relative who used to work for the State Attorney General's Environmental Bureau under Elliot Spitzer, the sheriff of Wall Street, before he self-destructed. And so when I began to read these articles about how Exxon had deceived the American people, had deceived the investors, had been funding the climate denial movement, even though their own research has showed otherwise, I sort of renewed my effort and took it more seriously, and began once again to lobby the Attorney General. And I can pretty much absolutely guarantee you, I was not the person to convince Eric Schneiderman to do this. But at least it was good when he actually announced that he was going to do the investigation. And New York has the Martin Act, which gives, we have Wall Street is in New York State, and a lot of the problems that take place with stock market manipulation take place here in New York. And so over the years, New York attorney generals have been given broader powers to go after Wall Street than places in the rest of the country. And that's one of the things that Elliot Spitzer really had begun to develop. And so one of the things under the Martin Act is that Schneiderman will not have to prove, in fact, that what they did was an intentional effort to misrepresent or to fraud. He just has to prove that they, in fact, misrepresented. And that's a much lower standard of proof, and it does give us some hope. I still hope someday that they'll actually begin to sue these companies when we have severe weather. But one of the other things that I had worked on, like a lot of people, had fought very hard and was able to convince our governor a couple of years ago to finally say no to fracking. And during that fight, some people had convinced a number of scientists, most notably Mark Jacobson, who's professor at Stanford University, but some others at Cornell, to do what's called the Jacobson Report. And the Jacobson Report was sort of a back-of-the-envelope sketch. Is it possible for New York State not to have to frack for natural gas and all this other stuff, and instead meet all our energy needs through renewable energy, energy conservation, energy efficiency? And the answer is yes. So we decided, well, let's try to get 100% clean energy in New York State by 2030. Then I saw that Professor Jacobson was doing all these, now 100% by 2050. So I went to, I thought he was going to be there in person. Turned out he was Skyping in. But they let me ask a question. I said, okay, we're about to jump off the cliff here in New York State, going to do this campaign, 100% clean energy by 2030. But now you get these reports saying 100% by 2050. So before we jump off the cliff, what is it? Can we do it by 2030, or can we do it by 2050? And he said, well, I've always been clear, not to me, but he said, I've always been clear. 100% is what we can do with existing technology by 2030. That's very clear. But 2050 is, well, that's basically to give the politicians 20 years to dither and dather and to respond to the campaign contributions from the fossil fuel industry and Exxon. And I was like, well, then we're going to ask for 2030, because if you give the politicians 20 years extra time to dither and dather, they're just going to add on another 20 years. So I'd rather try to shoot for 2030, and if we get to 2037 or 2050, we'll be happy. We're not happy, but we'll be happier than 27. So we had this campaign to do 100% by 2030. We actually have a piece of legislation. Senator Hoyman, somewhere around here, he's in Manhattan. A state senator is our co-sponsor of the bill. We have about 20 co-sponsors, more than from Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn these days. Some of them are Colton. But we have a bill in to get 2030, and I think this is going to be our next question, so I'll wait on that. We'll tell you what we are, trying to do on it. And we're also trying to get, New York City to do that. So we want to go to 100%, for all energy by 2030. According to Jacobson's calculations, that's 50% by wind, 40% by offshore wind, and about 38% by solar, and then conservation and tidal and geothermal. We have not a single offshore wind farm in the United States at the present moment. Not a single one. We're way behind where Europe is at. We do have one being built out on Block Island by Rhode Island. Little dinky one, but I'll be the first one. We want New York to be the first, or the second. And New York is the gold mine, if not on the planet, at least in the United States in terms of offshore wind. I know Massachusetts has a lot as well, but we're better. And in fact, the federal government has identified the area off of Long Island, and well, particularly Long Island and Rockaways, as the single best place in the United States to develop offshore wind, and they want to make it a top priority. We agree, let's get it done. We've got to convince the governor and the mayor to make a commitment to do basically a large, 15-year contract to purchase. It's a chicken and egg problem. Right now, offshore wind is too expensive. The only way you're going to get offshore wind to come down in cost is to build a lot of it. The only way they can build a lot of it is somebody agrees to buy it before they build it, and that's what New York State should do. And even according to the state's own government, we lower costs by 30%. Am I going too long? Okay. And I'll sort of wrap up and go more into that. And then finally, the carbon tax. Now, you're talking about, these fossil fuel companies killing people. That left-wing think tank, the International Monetary Fund, they estimate that the subsidy that we pay to the fossil fuel companies amounts to $5.3 trillion. I'm sorry, that's a T, not a B. That's trillion. Not a billion, $5.3 trillion. And that mainly comes because we do not charge or make these companies pay for the damages they cause by burning fossil fuels. I mean, yes, there's really bad subsidies we give them in the federal tax code, some in the state tax code, but the big one is we allow them to get away with pollution without charging for it. Now, it's estimated that the number of annual excess deaths in New York State from burning fossil fuels is somewhere between 3,100 and 20,000 people each year die. Okay, that's what we do right now. Some of us think that's not good, and at least we should start making them pay, for the privilege of killing us. And of course, you look in, places like the Bronx, probably around here, we have very, very high rates of asthma and other, pollution problems, air problem, and that's from burning it. And then the healthcare costs in New York State from allowing these companies to burn fossil fuels is about $30 billion on an annual basis. So we want a state carbon tax that begins to recapture the cost of that. We do have something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which we never liked, which is a cap and trade program, which we say the Pope condemned in his encyclical as being too subject to market manipulation. We do have a cap and trade program here in New York called RGGI, started under Governor Pataki, though he now disavows it, I thought he'd be the only Republican running on climate change, but he disappointed me. But the Congressional Research Service did a study recently on the impact of the carbon tax, of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, cap and trade. And they concluded that it had no impact on reducing carbon emissions in New York State, partly because it was so low it didn't make any difference to the companies. It's now risen a bit, it's still too low, $7.50 an hour. They did say the one beneficial impact of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the RGGI, was that the funds from the cap and trade was used to subsidize renewables, and that did help lower the carbon footprint. So they said that part was positive, but the impact of the carbon pricing was not. And basically, everybody agrees now that we should do a carbon tax. World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Exxon, Chase. What they disagree about is who's to do it. And it's surprising how many of these corporations suddenly are in favor of a world government. They want a carbon tax at the international level. I'm not aware of any other taxes like that. But that's because they feel they can get a better deal by having, the UN set a tax, and they don't want to deal with 180 different countries setting a tax. But at least they agree with the principle. Even so, it is going to be a fight.